Hello, everyone. This is Aryanna Prasad. I am a Popdust contributor and also a host for Fine Bet. And today I have a very special guest. We are continuing a conversation about the farmers' protests in India. Now, this weekend I did a broadcast on Punjabi singers to follow and the songs that they're making and how to support them. But today I have a Sikh expert with me today, and he's a leading voice in the United States and worldwide. But I actually have a wonderful video to show you a little bit more about who he is because he does so many incredible things. And then I'm going to let him introduce himself. But sorry, I'm here today with Dr. Simranjeet Singh. But here's a little bit more about who he is.
A woman had fallen on the street, and I went over to help her. It wasn't a big deal. She'd fallen, and I just went to give her a hand. And she reached out, and then she looked up and saw me, and she pulled her hand away. And she told me, go back to where you came from. And it struck me that this is the story of racism in America, that people would rather suffer in their own toxicity than to receive help from people who look like me. And that, I think, is not the sort of America I want to live in.
Why don't you just go, hey, I'm not Muslim?
It's just not an option for us to throw another community under the bus, even if it means things are harder for us. We believe it's the right thing to do.
When someone says something so hateful and awful to your face, what do you say to them?
It's tough. It depends on context. In a recent incident, somebody called me a slur, including the word Osama, with a few additional descriptors before that. You know, he knew he was wrong, and he knew what he was saying was wrong, and so
probably
it was very,
didn't expect to be called out on
exactly.
it either.
So it was very easy to just stop and say, hey, you know, I don't appreciate you saying that, and it's hurtful, and you know, this is a different form of racism that you don't appreciate, that you know is not acceptable in our society. And it was fine, and he apologized, and we shook hands, and yeah, it was great. It was very nice. The first vivid memory I have of dealing with racism was at my older brother's 5th grade class party. We walked into the roller skating rink, and immediately the manager walked over to my mother and said, those boys can't skate here. And we sort of rolled our eyes. We'd been through this before, and our mom was handling it, so we walked over to the arcade. And after about 10 minutes, she was still there, and I went to go check on her. I walked up to her behind the counter, tugged on her shirt, and she turned around and she was bawling. And I'd never seen her cry before. And so I just did what a 4th grader would do. I started crying as well. And she touched me on the shoulder and she said, why are you crying? And I said, the same reason as you. It's not fair. They should let us skate. And she said, oh, I'm crying for a different reason. I'm happy. And what? You're happy? She said, we're so lucky to have such good friends. Everyone here has agreed to walk out and protest because they're not letting you skate. And that, for me, who was this woman? Who can, in a moment where anyone else would feel defeated, helpless, where their kids are being discriminated against, and they're finding optimism in that moment? Where does that come from, and how do I get some of that? In this moment of division, hate, taking over our world, extremism, nationalism, provincialism, what is it that we need to do? We need to proactively distribute and share a message of connectedness, not just about the other or the neighbor. We need to change our thinking. We need to adopt a worldview where there is no other. Everything is a part of ourselves because we are all connected by divinity. So that when push comes to shove, it's not about me and you, it's about us. That's shared divinity, that's shared humanity, that's collective dignity. And that's the world that I want to be living in, and that's the world that I want us to build together. Thank you.
All right, so Simran, would you like to tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure, it's my pleasure. Thank you for arranging this, Aryanna. I really appreciate you. My name is Simranjeet Singh. I'm a writer and a scholar, a historian of South Asia and religion in particular. And so I've been doing this work in the academic sense, but also in the activist sense. And so, yeah, really appreciate being here with you.
Of course, yeah. And so I have followed Simran on Twitter. He's at Sikh Prof, and as I said, he's a leading voice. So many people follow him and love the things that he says. So I wanted to talk to him today about the farmers' protest in India, and it's actually incredible. He just co-authored a CNN article with his wife, Dr. Gunisha Kaur, and I'm just going to show the headline real quick. So Indian farmers are right to be outraged. So this is an opinion piece that they just did for CNN. I recommend everyone go check it out and read it. And we can link it in the comments below after our broadcast. But yeah, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your article. So what is the premise of your article?
The premise of the article is we're taking a position on why the farmers are outraged, and also trying to present a little bit more deeply what's happening and why. I think so much of the conversation around the protests have been focused specifically on the 3 agricultural bills that have been introduced that advantage the large corporations and disadvantage the small farmer. I think that's true, and that's an important thing for us all to recognize. But there's also a real history of abuse of Indian farmers in general, and so we wanted to sort of bring that to bear, because I think so often, and this is true in the American context as well, so often we look at these signal moments and say, well, what was the one issue that made everything explode, right? What was the straw that broke the camel's back? And in this case, and in many cases, if we look at history, it's not just one moment. It's a buildup, and there's frustration, and there are grievances, and there are really significant, deep issues. And so we wanted to bring those forward. We felt like that wasn't a part of the conversation. It's something that my wife and I feel passionate about and work on as scholars. And so that's what the premise of the article was.
Right, and that's what I wanted to discuss with you today, because I know a little bit about Sikh history, and it's just a litany of abuses, going back, I mean, really since partition. So can you walk us a little bit through that history?
Sure. I mean, I think the place to really understand modern Indian history as it pertains to the state of Punjab and the Sikh community is really in the colonial moment. And if you go just before the annexation of Punjab, it's worth noting that the Punjab region was sovereign. It was an independent state, a Sikh state. And that was one of the last to be annexed by the British during colonialism. And so as part of their tradition, and also as part of their lived experience, Sikhs have a very deep connection and a very deep commitment to freedom, to independence, to sovereignty. The belief in our tradition is that we don't answer to anybody that's mortal. We only answer to God. And that's part and parcel of who we are as people. And we believe very deeply, and our tradition teaches us this over and over again historically, that any form of oppression against any people is unacceptable. So I think those are 2 really important aspects of the Sikh psyche that live through into this moment. And with colonialism, you see Punjabis and Sikhs at the forefront of the independence movement. That's a critical thing because it's part of our psyche. And as India becomes a modern nation state in 1947 with partition, and Pakistan is created, you essentially have 2 different countries that are created for 2 different communities, right? Pakistan is created for the Muslim community. India is understood as a state for the Hindu community. And the Sikhs are left out of this equation, and they become very aggrieved by it. And to exacerbate that problem, it's not just that Sikhs don't get a homeland of their own and they're rendered invisible in this moment, but it's also that their very region, Punjab, is what is partitioned and split up, and then it's split up over and over again over the next few decades with some reorganization acts. And so now Punjab, the Indian state of Punjab, is a fraction of the size it once was, and what used to be an economically prosperous region is now really struggling. So I think that's a good way of understanding what's happening here. It's a community that had contributed heavily to the independence movement, and then immediately was rendered invisible and denied rights multiple times for various reasons, but that denial of rights and the denial of equal treatment really rubs Sikhs the wrong way, and understandably so. And so you have quite a bit of tension between the Punjab region and the Sikhs of the Punjab region in particular, with the central government, and that has continued over the past several decades into today.
Yeah, and I think that part of the issue too is when Sikhs try to bring up, the tensions, of course, that they've experienced. And as we said, like there are so many things at this point. But a lot of times when Sikhs try to bring that up, especially in India, they're silenced, by the state, but then also by a lot of citizens, a lot of Hindus who say, oh, Sikhs are trying to separate if they just bring up the things that have happened. So how are Sikhs really able to have this conversation or even this moment in history when, they're protesting and saying, hey, like we're not being treated fairly?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, like living in America, it almost reminds me of the conversation around racism, where if someone treats you in a racist way or says something racist to you and you call them racist, then you get attacked for pointing out their racism, right? And it's a very similar sort of catch-22 in India, where if you point to the human rights abuses of India, or you try and hold the Indian state accountable for the types of violence it enacts on its own people, all of a sudden you are seen as not a critic of the state, which you are, but you're seen as someone who is supporting terrorism or secessionism or separatism or anything like that. And so it very quickly, it's sort of a rhetorical move that's used to silence people, to manipulate the conversation and to dominate the conversation. And so I think in the Sikh community, part of the way that we have tried to maintain a foothold in this conversation is to simultaneously commit to our right to criticize the state without necessarily making it a politicized issue, right? In the sense of like whether these conversations necessarily need to be tied to, or if it's fair for them to be conflated with terrorism. Right. So again, like I can do that here in the States. I can be critical of the government. I can say that I disagree with Donald Trump's immigration policies without being labeled a terrorist. That's not really the case in India. If you call out, you're attacked immediately. It's a public conversation, and then there's also incredible online backlash, and that's used as a tool to silence activists as well. And so. It's a really interesting question because there are so many competing factors and ways in which the machine is weaponized against you, that you're having to fight multiple fires while you're advocating for justice, and it's a really tough thing to balance.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I know as Americans, so, I know obviously you've spoken out and I've said things, and just on social media, there is that backlash, and I've seen the response, stop interfering with our politics. And I think the interesting thing is sometimes when you're outside of the state that, we can all read Sikh history with access to history books, so we can understand what's happened, and we can be critical of the Indian state and say they've oppressed this minority for, decades since India's been a country, but really for centuries, Sikhs have been oppressed and targeted. So we know that. But so that's an interesting thing. But I saw recently you used the term justice warrior. And just for people to understand a little bit better about Sikhism, which I kind of see Sikhism as a perfect religion for anyone who's interested in social justice, because that really is the root of the religion that, inspired why it was founded and everything. And I feel like it's just very much led by that. So can you speak a little bit about why you think that Sikhs are justice warriors?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and it's a loose translation of a term that we use in our own language called a Sant Sipahi. Every Sikh is called on by the faith to live as a Sant Sipahi, a saint and a soldier at the same time. And so I'll sort of walk through the logic and the tradition, the theology that drives us to live this way. If we look at Sikh teachings and boil them down, we can see three basic building blocks. The first is an idea of oneness. The second is love, and the third is justice. And here's how they connect. the idea of oneness is the first principle we learn as children, that the world is absolutely interconnected. The term we use for that, and it's the first term to appear in our scripture, is ikonkar, that there is one connective force. It's the first thing I learned as a kid. It's the first thing my parents learned as a kid. It's the first thing I've taught my daughters. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. It's the first things I've taught them, that we're all connected. And there's no such thing as someone being good or bad. Everyone is equally divine. So that's the principle right there, that we're interconnected and everything is equally divine. And so when you truly feel this, when you truly feel the divinity of everything and you recognize that in the world around you, you live in a constant state of remembrance and recognition. And that is how the best English word for that is love. When you are in a loving relationship, you're constantly thinking about the person you love or the one that you love. And everything you encounter reminds you of that love, right? It's just like, as a dad now, I can really speak to, I'll see the most random thing on the street and be like, oh, that reminds me of this conversation I had with my daughter, right? Like that's what love is. It's this constant feeling of connection. And that's the goal of Sikhism. The goal in this tradition is to live a life where you constantly feel connected to the world around you. It's a state of love. That's what we talk about. Our fifth Guru Arjan says, Rajna chao, Mukit na chao, manpreet charan kamlade. He says, I don't care about power, Raj, I don't care about being a ruler. Mukit na chao, I don't even care about salvation. All I care is about being in love. And that to me is the real goal of Sikh teachings. And then when you love someone, your natural impulse is to serve them, right? You want to ensure that they're not suffering. You want to help take care of them. And again, my kids are a great example of that. I don't like changing their diapers. I don't like waking up at 2 a.m. and to help them out when they're having trouble sleeping. But it's not like I feel like I have a choice. I just do it because I love them, right? It's just this intuitive impulse that when you love someone, you show up for them. And this is what Sikhism teaches us, that if you truly live a life of love, if you truly feel connected to the world around you, there's no question. You just show up for the people around you. And it doesn't matter what their background is, right? If you feel connected to everyone, if you can go beyond your own community, right? The own identity politics, and really see the humanity and the divinity in everyone, then your impulse will be to serve everyone. And that is what we call sarbat dapala. We say that every day in our daily prayers. And it means you try and uplift all of humanity all together. And so that's the Sikh tradition. And I think, to me, that's what I try and instill in my kids. And it's the sort of daily practice that we're really focused on, so that we are able to show up in difficult times like the one in India right now.
Yeah, thank you for explaining all of that. I really appreciate it. And I love being able to share what Sikhism is with others, because I think a lot of people in India and the United States don't really understand a lot about the religion. And the thing I think about too, when you say saint and soldier, is a lot of people, I think they still see Sikhs as militant. They comprise a large part of the Indian military. They've been in other militaries around the world, so people think militancy. But as you just explained, it's all inspired with love and a fight for justice, which is very important to understand. But when we see these farmers and they're being, termed as, okay, these Sikhs are being violent again, they're protesters, when really they're fighting for freedom. So do you feel like Sikhs are, misunderstood or maligned because of their identity?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. And those sorts of stereotypes operate differently in different contexts, right? So in America, the misperception of Sikhs is very different. Because here in the States, we're hyper visible, right? Like everyone sees me when I walk down the street, or when I walk into a grocery store, or especially if I walk into an airport, right? Like people definitely notice me. But at the same time, we're unseen in the sense that no one actually really knows who Sikhs are. And so my experience in the way that I'm racialized is they see me as the stereotype of a terrorist, because that's our assumptions here in the States of what someone with a turban and beard is. In India, it's quite different, right? Like people have a sense of who Sikhs are, and there are competing stereotypes, like there are with lots of communities. But you're right to point out that in India, there is a sort of racialization of Sikhs as militaristic and inherently violent, much like how we think about Islam here in the States in terms of how we racialize Islam. And so there's this like constant narrative in India of Sikhs are not happy here, Sikhs want their own home, and Sikhs will be violent in order to get that. And so even when you have an incredibly peaceful protest that is pan-Indian, but is being led by Punjabi Sikhs, because those Punjabi Sikhs are leading the protest, the narrative immediately gets spun as this may be peaceful for now, but there are violent intentions here, right? There's no evidence of that. They're just playing on racialized assumptions of who these people are, and that's both incredibly disingenuous, but also dangerous, right? Like, think about the different ways in which people will respond to this movement, this protest in India, if they truly believe it is nonviolent in the way that it has been playing out over the last month, versus if they are fearful that this will turn violent and have a negative consequence on their community, right? Like, your willingness to stand in solidarity with this justice movement is very much informed by whether you believe these people are well-intentioned or malintentioned. And so using those stereotypes, I mean, it's not a new tactic. We see this over and over again across the world and in India itself. But it's important for us when these things are happening, that we're able to recognize them and reconcile them. I think that's really important for us.
Yeah, and especially in the United States, we saw everything that happened this summer, in the response to the death of George Floyd. I feel that the way that the Indian protesters are being treated is, using this similar terminology, calling them terrorists or they're aggressors and these sort of things. Those same tactics were used in the United States against Black Lives Matter protesters. There's so many peaceful protests and people say, oh, it got violent. Okay, and it's used again to malign them and make them seem violent. And that's been used, we see in American history with Black Americans dating back, through the Black Panthers and everything. They would show up. It's okay, well, they're militant, they're violent, people became afraid. And so going back to Sikh history in India, we see these sort of things happen, and like the way that India has used Punjab. It's India's breadbasket, producing so much wheat and rice for all of India. India's also used Punjab's waters and has drained so much water from the state for the rest of the nation to use. So its resources have been used, which of course India does not want to lose those. If Punjab became sovereign, it would lose all of those natural resources. But these tensions built up, and in 1984, Indira Gandhi, who was prime minister at that time, actually attacked the Golden Temple. And, in the months that ensued, there were pogroms and there was a Sikh genocide. And that's still something that a lot of people don't really know about, and even in India don't fully understand. So can you speak to, like what's happening today? Does it remind you of some of the tensions that were happening then, or, some of the terms that were used then before 1984?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think, a lot of people, so I'll say the standard issue narrative, which is, as a historian, just incredibly problematic. The standard narrative is the Indian government goes into the Golden Temple to flush out terrorists, and then there's a violent backlash. And as a historian, part of the problem with that narrative is it's incredibly one-sided, right? This is a government narrative coming from the very government that is attacking its people. So do we really want to trust a singular source on that? Probably not. And what are the multiple perspectives, right? That's the first thing I teach in a History 101 class, right? Like, whose voices are we hearing and who's missing and why? Who's being silenced? So I think that's the first question we need to ask, but also, even when we get the multiple perspectives of what actually happened, the thing we often forget to do when we're looking at history is understand the why. Like, what are the conditions that led up to this? And whether we're looking at the independence movement during the British period, or if we're looking at the agitation from Punjab in the 60s for the Punjabi Subah, or if we're looking at the 80s with Indira Gandhi, or if we're looking at today, like, it's incredibly important for us to recognize that economics play a key role here, and not just economics, right? And this is a key point for understanding what's happening today. There is incredible economic devastation in Punjab right now. and actually an incredible devastation across India. The rich are getting richer, but the poor are getting a lot poorer, and that's a real problem. But it's not just the economics, the environment, especially through the green revolution technologies, as you were alluding to, Aryanna. The environment has been deeply degraded. If you look at Punjab, there's uranium in the drinking water, the pesticides and fertilizers, all these chemicals that are required for these green revolution technology seeds. They lead to seepage. It doesn't just affect the soil, it then seeps into the drinking water, and you have alarming rates of cancer in these communities. And I've been to these communities, and you see, it's not just years of devastation, it's decades now. The epidemic of farmer suicides, which is sweeping across the country, it's not a new thing. It's been happening, and there has been it's not even that there's been no government support, there's been no government acknowledgement, right? Like there's not even a willingness to say this is a problem. So when they're turning a blind eye to their very citizens who are feeding them, like what kind of I sit here and I'm outraged because I'm offended. Like, what kind of a person do you have to be to take these people who are quite literally protecting you from famine and have been doing so for decades with this backbreaking work? And these people labor every day to serve their communities, and what do they get in return? Instead of supporting them, their government pulls the rug out right from underneath them. And that's not right. These people are dying. Right. So I'm a little bit at a loss for words in terms of what this situation, what's happening in this situation, because as much as it's there are historical connections and that this is a pattern of abuse and we need to recognize that, there's a real moral issue here in terms of what do you do, what responsibility do you have to the people who are taking care of you? Do you take care of them in return? Or do you let them die off? And I think that's the question that's at the center of this issue right now.
Yeah, and I feel like that's actually been kind of a current through Sikh history is, if you look at it, Sikhs have actually died to protect the religious beliefs of others. So there's a Sikh guru who actually sacrificed himself to protect Hindus. So that's at the core, again, of the religion, is to do what you can to serve others and protect others and love everyone, respect everyone's beliefs. But time and time again, especially since the creation of the Indian state in 1947, we've seen, Punjab never got its own homeland, and then the state was cut in half, the people were divided. Partition really hurt Punjabis especially. And I'm sure you have those family histories, and people that I know have those family histories and personal connections to that. So when we look at that, how do you think that this moment with the farmers' protests, what can Punjabis do really going forward? Because when, in 1984 and the tensions that were building up then, that was the state government's response. So if Punjabis continue to protest, do we look at that, like, where is this going to lead to?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very difficult to anticipate where this will lead. Given the pattern of human rights abuses and the way the Indian government has responded to issues of mass resistance in the past, it's hard not to imagine an outcome that's incredibly violent against civilians. And so we've seen it time and time again. And I find myself waking up at night and looking at my phone to see, like, is this the night? Is this the night where they started unleashing their military on these innocent people? And so, it's hard to say that out loud, but I think that's the truth. It feels almost inevitable, right? Like, it's happened too many times for us to ignore that reality. I think the big question in terms of what do we do, what do we learn from this? Well, I think that's the big question, and there are a lot of takeaways for me. I think the first is there is incredible power in collective memory, right? Part of what we're seeing and why I think Punjabis in particular are leading out on this is that they still feel the pain of the trauma that they've dealt with over generations. There's some great research on what happens with collective trauma. But Punjab in particular, if you think about partition of 47, followed by 80, 84, the violence of 84, and then followed by the genocidal killings, the extrajudicial killings, the forced disappearances by the state through the 80s and 90s. I mean, there is real collective memory around what it means when you allow a state to be authoritarian. What happens when you allow a state to maintain repression? Like your entire generations are wiped out, and we know that. And so this is what the farmers are standing up for. And so if we've ever had a moment where we value the importance of sharing these memories, it's now, right? For me, more than ever. I feel that as a father and as a historian, like this stuff is real, and it affects us on an everyday level. Another takeaway for me is being in the diaspora, it can feel so paralyzing to care and to want to do something and to not know what to do. And one of the big frustrations for me is there has been relatively little media coverage on the issue. A few of us have been pitching to outlets pretty much nonstop since the protest started, and we're getting very few footholds in the space. And so I think the answer there is not, let's continue begging and trying to convince people to care about us. I think the answer is we need to build more community power so that when these issues come up, we learned this after 9/11, right? I think, at least in the States, like we realized nobody knew about us, and we needed to start creating relationships across the board with different sectors to create community power. And I think I'm feeling that viscerally again right now, which is like as much capital as I have and other people who do this work have, as many relationships as we have, we're not able to leverage that into real change. And so we have a lot more work to do. And so for any of us who are feeling satisfied that we've made it as a community, or we've done better than we thought we could, or at least that we have some platform now, like all of those things can be true, but still the reality is we have a lot more to do. And that's a big takeaway.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because I'm actually not Punjabi and my family's not Sikh. I'm actually Hindu. My family's from Bihar, but I'm dating someone who is Punjabi Sikh. And, in learning about him and his history and everything that his family has been through, I learned about all these atrocities and I never knew about them. And I was shocked and amazed. And honestly, I felt so ashamed that this is something that Hindu nationalists in a Hindu state has done, because I've heard Hindus say things before against Muslims, but I didn't understand the discrimination against Sikhs, and I wasn't aware of that. So, but, even though I'm not, I guess genetically a part of that community, this is something that I care about, of course, because I have loved ones who are affected by these things. But for, anyone in America who may not know someone personally, how do we get them to care about these things? They are human rights issues, but we know that a lot of times we tend to be the ones championing causes for our communities, because we're the ones who feel these things and know these things. So how do we get activists of all kinds to, understand the human rights issues that are going on in India and to help champion the Sikh cause?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we've learned anything from the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think really created a new level of commitment towards racial justice in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime here. It's that you only get people to care when they can feel it affecting them personally. And I think that's it. And it's incredibly hard to do with a community of people that's across the world, whose issues seem unrelated to our life experiences here, who look so different in terms of their racial, ethnic identities, but also religious identities. And people who, I mean, quite frankly, it's a class issue as well, right? Like these are working class people, and how do we get? I mean, that's a problem we have in this country too. How do we get elite folks, upper class folks, upper middle class folks to care about the working class? And there's a real divide there. And I think the best answer that I've been able to find so far is to make the argument that one, it's a moral issue. That this is not a case of whether you care or not. This is right versus wrong, and the way these people are being treated is just wrong, and there's no denying that. I think there's an argument to be made about how their livelihoods affect all of us, and how they, and I've, in our conversation, I've said this too, like, these are people who put their lives on the line every day to take care of the rest of us. And we ignore them. We don't think about farmers, and we eat their foods happily. And so what does it look like for us to be mindful about who is doing labor so that we can live? And the third case that I would really make, and this is a tougher one for me, is that you're never going to convince someone to care for you by asking them to care for you, right? Like that's not the answer. Begging is not going to do it, but I think creating new avenues, being creative about how we humanize people who are otherwise seen as foreign or unrelatable, right? Like, what is that? What does it look like for us to create the conditions in this country where someone sees me walking down the street and sees me as a real person as opposed to a threat, right? It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take multiple approaches from different industries, different kinds of storytelling. Like, we need to reimagine what it means to humanize one another. And I think that's a critical component that's incredibly difficult to do. It's a long-term project, but it's one that we need really badly right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I actually want to show something, because we're talking about the discrimination Sikhs face in the United States. I have an image actually from your Twitter. So anti-Sikh hate crimes in the UK have increased by 70% in the last 2 years. What will you do today to help end hate? And there's a link to an article. So, we see things like that, like the fear and hatred in both India and the United States has real consequences. This results in actual violence and death and targeting. So can you speak a little bit about some of the work that you do to, combat that? I mean, you've written this incredible article for CNN, but you really do so much.
Oh, thank you. I think there are all sorts of things we can do. To me, it all comes through the lens of education. I think if you ask me what I try and do, it's to educate, and it's not just about knowledge, right? Like, knowledge helps, but the reality is, just knowing doesn't make us any better humans, right? We're in a situation now where more Americans have college degrees than at any other point in history. We're more educated than ever before. And also hate crimes are spiking. And so is there really a link between those two? Or maybe the other way of asking that is knowledge the solution? I don't think so. I think what we really need to be focused on is instilling values. And that's what I try and do. What are the ways in which we can get people to practice their values? We all have values. We all believe, we have ideals. We all believe that we want to be good people. And we try and live by that, but we don't usually put that into practice on a day-to-day basis. And so what does it look like for someone who says, I believe all people are equal? Like, I don't know anybody who wouldn't say that. I believe all people are equal. Like, what are you doing then to make sure that everyone is treated equally? I don't know many people who are willing to do that work, right? And so there's a big difference there. What does it mean to believe something and then to put it into practice? So there are different avenues. I mean, one of the things I did recently is I wrote a children's book, and it's really coming out of this desire to do better with our kids about humanizing people who look different from them. Like, I really believe if they can see the humanity in people who look most different from them, they can see the humanity in everyone, right? And so it's a really, I think empathy is an important practice for anti-racism, for justice. And, I learned that from my tradition. The word Sikh literally means a student. To be a student means you're always learning, you're always growing. You have to have that humility, but you also have to have that curiosity and that willingness to connect. And so I try and bring that to bear in my work, whether it's through writing or speaking or teaching or anything. It's always this idea of I want to educate, but I also want to be educated, and that's how we'll all grow together.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually an incredible opportunity we have as Americans. Is there is such incredible diversity, and while that means there can be such division, it presents such an opportunity for us to learn about so many different people. And that's something that I really appreciate. But yeah, you mentioned your children's book, Just Saying Keeps Going. That is an incredible story. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's about the true story of the oldest person ever on a marathon. Foja Singh ran a marathon at the age of 100, which I'm like, if I can live to 100, I will be very pleased. I can't imagine running that much at that age. I can hardly imagine running that much now, even though I've run marathons before. Yeah, it's the story that really speaks to me in that Foja Singh dealt with all sorts of challenges throughout his life. Disability, racism, ageism, classism. He was a Punjabi farmer growing up, and that's really important part of his identity. And so it's really trying to bring together this intersectional lens to children's literature and saying, you can really we can reimagine what our heroes look like, right? Like they can be people who deal with disability. They can be elderly. They can be a different religion. They can wear a turban on their head and they can still be cool. And so it's really trying to bring that into our kids' minds and to bring this sort of empathy and anti-racism together into their learning.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, that's a great way for people to, we're talking about how to fight hate here in the United States and learn about different peoples. Children's books are a great way of doing that. And I feel like Foja Singh, as you said, he represents so many things. Like he's a wonderful Sikh figure, but just such an inspirational person that all of us can look up to. Yeah, so I thank you so much for being here today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I appreciate it. This was really fantastic, and I appreciate you and Popdust giving a platform to this issue because, as I said, it's been so hard to get people to care. And this is a real issue of justice, and I think a real issue of inclusion and making people feel like they are being represented in media spaces. And there are massive protests happening all across the US and Canada and the UK and Holland. I mean, everywhere you look. There's a protest and it doesn't feel like anyone's, at least in the media space, is paying attention. So I appreciate you bringing this forward and your team for lifting up this story because I think it's so important and I really appreciate that.
I completely agree. And yeah, I'm also very grateful for Popdust for letting us do this because yeah, as South Asian Americans and for me being in the media space, you always want to bring attention to these stories, and if it's not us doing it, it sort of feels like who is going to, so I think the important thing is that we always do what we can to uplift each other and make sure that we share those stories. And I love and appreciate all the ways in which you're doing that. Guys, go ahead and follow @SikhProf on Twitter. He's incredible. He's also on Instagram, but just go keep your minds open and learn. And please read his CNN article and do what you can to continue learning about the farmers' protest. Simran, thank you so much for coming on, and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Aryanna. Take care. Bye, everyone.